Good day friends. This video is just one of a series of video lessons designed for the Form 4 and Form 5 students pursuing their CSEC Information Technology exam. The lessons in this video series are designed for the new 2020 CSEC IT syllabus. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain in your own words the difference between data and information. Explain in your own words some ways that people use information. Identify at least 3 sources of information. Evaluate sources of credible information. Describe characteristics of credible information. Describe methods for validating and verifying data. And finally, describe the methods and documents used to collect data. Data versus information. Data is raw, unprocessed facts. These may be facts about persons, places, things, or events that have been collected through observation or measurement. Information is meaningful knowledge derived from raw data or data that has been processed, organized, or put into context so that it is meaningful to the user. To explain this further, let's look at the following scenario. So let's discuss what you just saw in the video. What did Simon do wrong? Simon should have known the difference between data and information. What should have Simon done differently? Well, maybe he should have presented the data as tables or charts. Basically, he should have presented the data in a form that was useful for his boss. He should have given his boss useful information. What are some of the ways that people use information? Generally, people use information for planning and decision making. For instance, students attending school need information about their performance so that they can make proper career planning decisions. Patients in a hospital would need information to make informed decisions regarding their health. Fishermen will use information about the weather so that they can plan their fishing schedules and decide whether or not it is safe to go out to sea. Businesses always rely on information to make daily strategic decisions. Regardless of what people use the information for, they have to trust that the information that they are receiving is trustworthy, credible, and reliable. To some businesses or organizations, information is so important to them that they trade it as a commodity. In other words, the information can be bought or sold. So far, we have looked at the difference between data and information and some ways that people use information. We still have to look at sources of information and the characteristics of good information. But before we move on, let's see how much you have learned so far. At this time, you can pause the video to take enough time to think about your answers. Characteristics of information. Once information is collected, it is often communicated directly to the person who wishes to use it. In order for it to be useful or credible, the information must be relevant. It must be what the user needs to know, and it must be up to date. It must also be accurate. Care must be taken to ensure the data is as correct as possible. It must also be timely. The information should be provided for problem solving before a critical stage is reached and opportunities are lost. It must also be complete. It must represent a whole picture of a problem or solution. It must be presented in an appropriate medium, either through a legitimate printed medium or a legitimate electronic medium. It must also be cost effective. The value of the information should be more than the cost involved in its collection. Sources of information. You can get information from formal and informal communication, such as word of mouth, meetings, announcements, interviews. You can get information from publications such as newspapers, research, media reports, or professional journals. Information can be gotten from questionnaires such as opinion polls or market research. You can even get information from social media such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Twitter. Okay, so here's an activity for you to do. Make a list of all the sources of information that you can think of and say whether each one is a credible source of information or an untrustworthy source of information. So, we know that information is produced from the data that's collected. So let's look at how data is collected. The two main avenues through which data can be collected are measurement and observation. Measured data may be things like wind speed, rainfall, temperature, or even the amount of fuel in your car. Observed data could be things like the number of cars passing by your house, people's behavior, or emotional state. To help you to understand this concept, let's look at a couple examples. Two people looking at a track and field 100-meter sprint where two athletes cross the finish line at the same time. One person, by simply observing, declares a tie, while the other, who used a stopwatch, declared one athlete the winner because he crossed the finish line 2 milliseconds before the other. Which of these two pieces of data is more accurate? Another example is where during a cricket match, the umpire declares the batsman out by LBW. However, the instant replay suggested that the ball never touched his pad. Which data would you trust? Some types of measured data are electronically stored directly through the use of sensors linked to an embedded computer system, such as those found in airplanes, automobiles, or data logging devices that collect environmental data. However, some measured and observed data have to be manually entered into an information processing system. Some examples of such information systems would be things like patient records in a hospital vehicle ownership at the licensing department, student information in school, or billing information at your local utility company. One of the drawbacks of data that is manually entered is that it is prone to errors. Have you ever interacted with any information system and your name was misspelled or some of your data was missing? To enter data manually into an information system, it has to be first entered into some form of paper-based document. This document is referred to as the source document. The source document is important as it can be used later on to verify the data after it is entered into a system. Data is usually entered into an information system by a data entry clerk. Because data is so important to many organizations today, data entry jobs are in high demand and would usually require basic computer operating skills. This type of job may be an ideal entry level job for someone seeking to develop a career in IT. Data that is entered into a computer system by humans, however, is prone to errors. This would result in the data becoming incomplete, inaccurate, or irrelevant. Have you ever visited an organization to conduct business and your name was misspelled or some of your data was missing? Well, that's an example of human error. Now think about places that you have visited that required you to provide data. Think about the last time you visited your doctor. I'm sure you were given a form that you had to fill out. If you visited the licensing department, the first thing you do is fill out a form for the transaction that you came to do. Even in school, teachers write down marks in their mark books before entering it into the school's information system. Even when you go to pay a bill at your local utility company, you have to walk with your printed bill before you can pay. These documents are referred to as source documents and helps the organization keep track of their daily transactions. The source document can be used to later verify data that has been entered into the information system. In the case of the utility bill, however, the bill originated from within the organization, came to you, then you return to the organization to make a payment and update your records. The organization then keeps the payment remittance slip as proof that the transaction took place. This type of source document is referred to as a turnaround document. Other examples of turnaround documents are parking receipts from automated parking kiosks or boarding passes that are used at the airport or other transportation hubs. So what types of data that can be collected? Here's a list of some of the common forms that data would exist in. Data can exist as text, images or graphics, video, audio, or animations. Before you continue, see if you can do this activity. Make a list of examples of data that can be collected, then say which primary data type does it belong to. Then, for each item on your list, say whether it can be entered into a computer system automatically or manually. There are two main types of source documents: human readable documents and machine readable documents. Now let's look at human readable documents for a second. These documents could include handwritten documents or documents that were created using a computer. Now, computer-produced documents could exist in hard copy, which is a printed form, or soft copy, and usually takes the form of one of the primary data types mentioned earlier. One of the most popular document formats that you may be familiar with is the PDF, which stands for Portable Document Format, and as the name suggests, is a format that can work on almost any device. Another popular format is the .doc or .docx format, which is a proprietary format developed by Microsoft. Can you think of any other document formats? Now let's look at machine readable documents. These documents are always produced by a computer. and can exist in both hard copy or soft copy and can contain coded text, barcodes, or QR codes. Some examples of machine-readable documents can include but are not limited to machine-readable passports, automatic parking receipts, or boarding passes. Can you think of other examples of documents that can contain barcodes or QR codes? Also, can you remember another term used to describe these types of documents? Before we continue with the lesson, let's take a few minutes to see how much you have learned so far. At this time, you can pause the video to give yourself enough time to think about your answers. Two methods of evaluating data are verification and validation. Data verification is a process during which data that has already been input or captured is checked to ensure that it matches the data on the source document. Data verification is usually carried out by another person, and the aim is to identify and correct typographical and transposition errors that may occur during the data entry process. Typographical errors are data entries that contain missing characters, missing text, incomplete text, or incorrect text, whereas transposition errors are caused by inadvertently switching the position of two adjacent characters in a string of text. Two methods of verification are double entry and proofreading. Double entry is a method that requires data to be entered twice and should be done by two different data entry clerks, and both entries must be checked against each other to ensure that they are identical. Proofreading is a manual method of verification during which a data entry clerk visually inspects the source document against data that has been already entered by another data entry clerk. Proofreading is less reliable than double entry, but it is significantly quicker. Data validation is a method of evaluating data that is done by a computer system. This is done to ensure that the data meets the specific criteria set out by the organization before it is entered into the information system. Database administrators and designers and systems developers are usually the ones tasked with creating the system checks for validating data. Some methods of validation include range check, reasonableness check, data type check, consistency check, presence check, format check, and length check. Let's examine the methods of validation in greater detail. The range check ensures that data falls within a specified range. The system checks that it is within a predetermined range set out by the organization. For example, a month must be in the range 1 to 12, whereas an exam score will fall within the range 0 to 100. The reasonableness check ensures that the data conforms to specified criteria. The system compares the input value with an expected reasonable value or set of rules. For example, an employee claiming to work more than 8 hours overtime in any given day when the company has established a maximum of 8 hours. This is similar to our range check. The data type check ensures that the data is the correct data type. The system compares the input value with the type of data required. An example will be attempting to enter text where integer values are required, or uploading a PDF if an image file is required, or an MP3 if a video file is required. The consistency check ensures that the data does not contradict other data in the set. The system will detect whether the current value is in contradiction with other data entered. For example, ticking M for gender and entering a maiden name will show conflicting information, or creating a password and entering the password wrong will be conflicting information. This will be an example of a consistency check. Presence check ensures the completeness of data. The system enforces a rule that no field should be left blank or empty. For example, registering for exams. The format check, data is supplied in the format that is expected. The system checks that the correct data type is entered for each position in a field. For example, the driver's license number or vehicle registration number, or a password that requires capitalized letters or special characters. In the length check, data is checked to see if it is too long or too short. The system will count the numbers of characters entered and compare it with what is expected. For example, a password field would check to see if the password is too short or too long. Okay, I hope you are enjoying the lesson so far. Let's see how much you have learned. So let's recap what we learned today. Today we looked at the difference between data and information, ways that people use information, the sources of information, evaluating credible sources of information, the characteristics of good information, methods and documents used to collect data, and methods used for validating and verifying data. In the next lesson, we'll look at appropriate storage media for storing collected data. We'll look at methods for storing collected data. And we'll look at choosing an appropriate method for accessing stored data. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Bye now and see you in the next lesson. Thank you for watching, and I do hope that you found this video informative, and I hope that you enjoyed it. See you in the next video.